Guten Tag. My name is Adrienne Tacke. I'm a software engineer and senior developer advocate for MongoDB. I work remotely in Las Vegas. It's a long way to get here, and I assure you, if you're ever in Vegas, please message me, because it's way more than gambling and parties and hookers and drugs. I want you to take away that stereotype. I will show you the other side of Vegas, the other good side. So, without further ado, around 3 years ago, I started at a job that was a very, very small company. It was around 20 people. And a lot of my other previous jobs were around the same size, maybe medium size. I never worked for a company as large as MongoDB before. And when I first got to my desk and I started to go through the code base, get acquainted with what our project was, what it was doing, I naturally asked, so, how do we deploy this? What is our deployment process? And can anyone take a guess as to what the deployment process was based on this? Yes, it was copy and paste, and I was terrified. So what our deployment process looked like was we would probably log into FileZilla, SFTP server, and we would move everything from a dev folder to a prod folder. And it was very, very, very scary. It was unreliable, and it was just the way things were done. Until the team started to grow, until our company started to grow, until our platform started to get larger and we needed to scale. We knew that this was a problem, and we knew that we needed to fix it. But why haven't we fixed it? I asked. I was the first one to say, why are we doing it this way? And these are some of the answers that I got. It's too complicated to set up. So when I started asking about CI/CD processes, why don't we have continuous integration? Why don't we have continuous deployment? The rest of our platform was actually already on Azure, so that was even more baffling to me as to why we weren't using the services for it to automate that. Why is this very manual process still a part of our development workflow when the rest of it was already in the cloud? That was a senior engineer. This is the way that it's always been done. There's no time to learn it. There's too many things that could go wrong. There's all kinds of reasons as to why we couldn't do it, or why we shouldn't do it, or why there was just no reason to do it, although I tried to argue that there were plenty of reasons to do it. Another large reason for this is I don't want to learn yet another language just for configuration. So how many of you have had to learn YAML? How many of you liked it? Yeah. So yes, it simplifies it. It's very useful for other things. It's becoming necessary for a lot of the things that we're using. But again, when you're coming from a small company who already doesn't think it's necessary to automate your workflow, this is just another obstacle. It's another thing you have to convince your manager, your other teammates, even yourself. I didn't want to learn another language. I didn't want to do yet another thing on top of all the other tasks that I had to do. Even though I knew this was a good thing for us, and even though I knew it might have been necessary for us to automate our workflow, in reality, we didn't want to learn something else. And we can't automate everything. That was our manager. So once he heard about automation, he's like, whoa, 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 you can't automate everything. What about the approvals? What about the logs? What about this? What about that? There were still some parts of our workflow that just could not be automated. That was a valid concern. We can't just say once we make a commit, we push it straight to production. No, there are steps there. There are checks and balances and gates and approvals that need to happen that are realistic in a real business. And so these were all concerns that we had while discussing and talking about how do we actually go and move away from a manual deployment process to something automated. And so as we started talking about this, and as they started giving me these arguments, I started to ask them, what about reliability? We can't keep doing copy and paste from one to another. The other thing is the only person who had access to that server was that senior engineer, and he held all the keys to the kingdom. He would not give it to junior engineers. He would not give it to me, absolutely not. And he would not give it to the manager, or the manager could have access, but they don't know what to do with that. So what happens when the senior engineer is not there? And what if we need to release? Well, we can't deploy because he's the only one that can access that server. What about speed? We were growing at an exponential rate in our company. And by growing, that meant we had more clients coming on. With more clients meant more feature requests. With more feature requests came more bugs. And as we started to scale and started to iterate on our platform, it became necessary for us to start pushing these things out faster, to start giving value to not only our internal team and to the business, but to our clients, our actual users who are using our platform. But at the current rate of our deployment process, we had set deployment dates of about every 2 weeks. So we could be working, and we even implemented Agile, we had our tasks, we had sprint planning. All of that really doesn't mean anything if you have to wait for some really antiquated, release day every 2 weeks. If your developers are going and completing bug fixes, completing tasks, and they're doing multiple a day, you should be able to release those out that same day. That's value that's waiting for the customer that you're otherwise delaying because of the process that you have. So these are some of the things that I have tried to explain and we discussed with our team, and slowly but surely they understood that this was something that we needed to change about our process. So as I said before, we were a full Microsoft shop. That was something that was so baffling to me because everything was deployed on Azure, and we even had dev environments, local environments, but each dev had their own subscription, and we could test on there. But all of our deployments were still manual, so it was really crazy to me. It was like Azure Pipelines was waving to us and say, "Hello, I'm here for you to use. Why aren't you using me?" And so when we talked about this and I pointed out, hey, there's something here that we should be using. We're paying for it. It's available for us. The rest of our processes here, we're technically a full Microsoft shop except for our deployment processes. So what steps do we automate? And when we started discussing this, we started looking at a lot of the pain points that we had, the things that were really slow for us in our workflow. And we also asked, what can we automate? So again, to the manager's concerns, we can't automate everything. That's going to give him a heart attack, and that's probably not going to be compliant. So we needed to make sure that once we took a look at all the steps that we could automate, or all the steps that could be automated, we took out the parts that should not be automated, and instead looked for alternative solutions for them. So just to give you some context of what our existing process was, we would code away bug fixes or features. And then we would open a pull request, naturally, feature branch, and merge it to dev branch. But not before a code review. So we would code review, we'd ask our questions, we'd make sure at least 2 developers would look at every single thing, make your comments, make your changes, and then once that's finally approved, we would merge it into dev. And then we luckily had a QA environment. A lot of smaller companies don't actually have that. They just work fully off of production. But we were good enough to have QA. So once this was merged into dev, we would then go promote it to the QA environment where our quality assurance team would test it. This is where they would, make sure the buttons were the right color, that they were looking the right way on all of our browsers. And this is because we did not have any type of automated UI testing yet. So it was the QA's job to really go in there, run it, make sure everything was working. And after we got QA's approval, that was next. That's how we deployed to prod. And so I felt like this every single time we had to deploy. I was like, you're waiting, you work on these bug fixes, you work on these features, you're so happy to bring them out there, you're ready for your users to use them, and then you had to wait 2 weeks, maybe sometimes 3 weeks, or even a month. So there were times and periods where, because our senior engineer went on vacation, we couldn't release for about a month and a half. And I said, well, this is a use case for a backup engineer to do the deployment. But that was another story with compliance. So that was a very big bottleneck, right? And every single time this occurred, this is exactly how I felt. This is not how we should feel as developers. As devs, we should be focused on writing code. We should be focused on how do we create features that are useful for our users? How do we make things that we enjoy? How do we make our experience and our workflow better? Instead of worrying about configuration or worrying about copy-pasting some things and maybe missing a file, these are things that should not be in our head. We get paid, what is it called? Ein hübsches Sümmchen. To do really, really hard thinking, right? A lot of thinking, a lot of philosophizing, a lot of discussing with our teammates. So we should not be getting paid that much to be working with this. So this stops today. There was just a point where we were reaching too many bottlenecks. Even upper management started to say, hey, our releases are way too slow. We are not delivering value to our customers at a fast enough rate. People are actually leaving. And some of the other outstanding bug fixes that we had, they're too slow. We are not fixing them fast enough. Now, to the customers, it appears this way because we were releasing at such a slow rate. When in reality, sometimes those bug fixes or those bug reports would come in, we would work on them right away. Sometimes it's a typo, sometimes it was an Internet Explorer bug. Those were quick fixes, easy wins for our customers, but they were delayed. And so it seems as if the dev team was not working. It seems as if we didn't care about the users because we weren't listening to them, when in fact we are actually doing these things and fixing it and creating more value. They just don't see it. And that's all because of the manual deployment process that we had. So we started talking about it, and we started looking at it, and luckily I had some experience in it, not a lot, but this was my first try to actually get it started for this team that I've had. And it isn't, and I want to show you today how easy it is to do in Azure DevOps. So if you're familiar with it, this may be somewhat simple for you, but I guarantee you that by showing you how easy it is to do, even through a graphical interface, it is much easier to explain this to your teammates or maybe persuade your managers or your other senior engineers who may be hard to convince that this is the way to go. So we will start. I have a very, very basic Blazor app here. And that's my presentation. And this is the branches that I have. So most of us follow the same dynamic. We have a dev branch and a master branch. And you'll see here that what we wanted to do, one of the first things we wanted to do, was to create an automated continuous integration pipeline. So what does that mean? The requirement that we had here was that every time somebody pushed a commit up to dev, we wanted to automatically run that build. We didn't want to do that anymore manually. And why should we? Why should we wait for somebody else to do it when Azure DevOps can do it? So this is how we did that. So we'll create a pipeline here. And to really drive home the point of the journey that we actually took, none of us knew YAML at that point, so we're going to use the classic editor. And what we're going to do here is it gives you so many options. So it doesn't even mean that you have to be on Azure repos. You could be on GitHub, you can be on Subversion. I hope you're not, and all of these other things. So what we're going to do here is we have our busted Twitter demo here. And for this particular one, I want to make a build for dev, right? So this is when we push a commit, maybe it's a bug fix, maybe it's a feature branch, and this is going to initiate a build once anything is merged into dev. And so the app I have is a .NET Core app. So another thing that's very easy about this is that they already have several templates for you. So if you are using containerized applications or you have Docker containers, you can use the template there. If you have Python applications or older ASP.NET applications, you can use your templates. This made it very simple for us because, as you'll see, if you select one of these, it automatically adds the appropriate steps that you need for your build. This was completely invaluable for us because all of these steps would have been somebody manually doing it. Even if somebody tried to automate it on their own, there's always the potential for them to do it the wrong way, or to not repeat it in the correct way, or to do it in a deterministic manner. So by using these templates, you can assure that every time you do your build, it's going to be the same. So in order for this demo to go a little faster, don't do this in real life, but I'm going to take away tests. And I'm going to remove the symbols path right here, just so it goes a little faster. So now, that's pretty much, if you just wanted to get up and running, this is all you need to do other than this. So the largest part here is, in order to enable continuous integration, you have to check that you are going to enable continuous integration. And what's great about this is that you can filter which branch is going to trigger this build. So here, it's already selected dev, and what also you can do is batch changes while a build is in progress. So what this does is also very helpful if you have a lot of team members who are working at the same time. What happens when this goes is, as a build is running, let's say one is currently running right now, if other team members are pushing commits up there, the next time it runs a build, it won't sequentially do 8 or 9 builds. It will batch all of those changes together and do them in a single build. And that's very helpful in terms of time, and it's very helpful in terms of keeping your history a little bit cleaner because you don't do a build for every single one. You can do that if you require that complex logging, or if you need to log at that granular of a state, but usually it's a lot faster if you do batch them together, especially if you're on large teams. And that's pretty much it. That's all the build pipeline will do. So I'm going to save this here. So that's our build pipeline. We have no runs yet because we haven't done anything. And now the next part of it is we obviously have to release it. So if you go over here really quick to my portal, you'll see here, whoops. Nope. You'll see here that I already have a ready app service here. And this is where we want to deploy to. So now we're going to create a new new release pipeline that's going to connect to that build artifact that we have just created. So we already have an app service. So again, you can use these templates because they are much faster and already include what you need. And for this particular one, since this is dev, this is the way we have used it. So the stages that we have here in these release pipelines, we have used as our environments. And so as you'll see here, if I change the stage name, it changes the name right here. So after that, in order for this to work, we have to add an artifact. We need to have a source of what we're going to release. And in this case, we're going to use the build artifact that is generated from our build. Now, the cool thing about this is that the default is latest. That's usually what we want, right? So every time we have the latest build, the latest successful build, that's the one that we want to release. But if you have more complex workflows, if you have multiple projects, if you have different release configurations, these are some options that you can use. So aside from latest, you can also use tags, or you can use specific branches with tags. So let's say you only wanted to release ones with tags that say, final version, or this is the final release, or you follow Semver and you only want to do whole releases. You can use those tags and filter it in that way so that you can continuously build and continuously do that. But if you only want to do releases for that particular one, you can choose this option. For now, we're just going to stick with latest because mine is a very simple Blazor app. And we'll add that. So the next part here is the continuous deployment trigger. So once we've added this artifact, that's great. Our release pipeline has no idea what to do yet. Nothing is connected. It's going to continuously build, or once it gets a commit from the dev branch, it's going to trigger that build. And now that it's produced this artifact, right now there's nothing that it knows to do. So we need to add the continuous deployment. So we're going to enable that. And again, you have the option to filter the branch that you want to enable. But in this case, we don't need to do that because we already have the dev. You can also do pull request triggers, and these can get a little bit more complex if you want to follow something close to how GitHub does their things, but we might touch that later. So we've enabled continuous deployment, and now what happens? We still need to do this. So once we go into our stage, this is our dev stage. What we want to do is connect it to the subscription that is holding your project. So for this case, I have a demo one that's Bastacon Resource Manager. And the service name that I want to deploy to is the demo. So after those are selected, you have some other options here that you can use. If you need to do any kind of file transforms, or if you have some sort of transformations you need to do in your web config, this is the place to do it. If you have application configuration settings, this is the place to do it, especially if you have different environments that you're deploying to. And you have a bunch of other options that you can use, which for right now, we don't need. This is also a place where you can add any type of variables and variable groups. Variable groups are very helpful if you have something that is used throughout multiple places in your project, so you can instantly pull them from here instead of saving them into your repos. So for now, the next thing we're going to do here is do a pre-deployment condition. So essentially, the default is what we need. It's basically saying after the build artifact has been done and the continuous deployment trigger has been activated, we're going to go and do it and release it. Now these options we'll get to in a second. I just want to show you that it's pretty much done. Not yet. I'm going to change this so I don't confuse myself. All right. So now we have a release. It says no release is found because none have been released yet. None have been run yet. So now, if I make a change here, let's say we're in Germany, right? So we're going to do hello build. And then I have a quick little GIF here that I would like to use. Cool. So now I need to go to my, whoops, eine Sekunde. Where is it? Source. All right, so we're in dev and we have something that's been modified. I obviously modified the index page. So if we commit this, I like to be verbose in my commit messages. I don't know about you. So we've now committed this. So if we go to our pipelines, we should see this should be running. Let's see. Let's see. Did I push? Thank you. Thank you. I'm already thinking ahead of myself. After you push it, cool. So it's running, right? We've committed something to dev. It has kicked off our build automatically. And the cool thing about this is that you can go through and see what it's actually doing. But the even cooler part is that this is all doing it after you've pushed your commit. So after I push my commit, I don't have to worry about, okay, now I have to take some time out of my day to run this build. Now I have to go bug the senior engineer that doesn't want to let me do this or connect to the SFTP server for prod because only he has the keys to the kingdom. There's none of that anymore. Once I do this, I can move on to my next task. I don't have to worry about this. And this is so simple, but it's astonishing how many other companies still don't do this. There's still some sort of manual process in play that really bottlenecks how fast they can release, especially if you have a large team and you're able to get so many things done. If this is the bottleneck for you, this is going to be a life changer for your team. So, restore did not finish, see? So you can also debug on the fly here. Let's see. Exit code is thrown. Exception services. Oh, I know why. Let's see. Oops. So let's debug on the fly here. Whoops, not that. Let's edit. That shouldn't be it. Let's try that again. This was working, and I deleted everything. There's probably some configuration that I'm missing. So let's see. I even have a typo. Nobody pointed that out. Let's see if this works first, then we'll do the typo. Yay! While we're waiting, does anybody have any questions? Am I going to, I'm pretty sure, yes?
Actually, Mark, if I remember right, because I did this once, like back a half year ago or something, it is free for GitHub open source projects to do this.
Yes.
So it's not just for companies.
Correct. So with GitHub Actions, that's something that is very comparable to this. We just use this just because the rest of our platform was on Microsoft.
This exactly.
Oh, yeah. But yes, you're correct. GitHub does have this now, and it is fully integrated. So let's see here. Should be done. Awesome. So it's succeeded. So now if we go to our releases, why is this not going? Is this finished? Success. Well, the whole point was to have it automated, but let's see what's wrong. Just don't look for a second. Hold on, let me automate it. Let me see. This is correct. So we're using the build. So we're using the source artifact from our build here. This is enabled. So we do need to add the build. I apologize. Wonderful. That should not be there because it should know. Let me see. Include. Nope. This shouldn't be necessary because we already have this connected to the artifact. So let's see. So after release, predeployment, that's fine. It would be automated. I'm going to figure this out. Let me see. So let's just get this up and running. Why is this? I missed something here. Let me see. The artifact is here. Let's double check. It's after release.
Maybe because you did the pipeline manually. Yeah. You triggered the resubmit. Maybe it works.
Let's try it out. Since we have a typo anyway. Yeah. Is this supposed to be capitalized? Dankeschön. Meine Deutsch ist nicht so gut. Okay. So I want to double check this just because I'm paranoid. Let me see. Everything looks good. Yeah, latest. We are using the same source alias build, and let's make sure that that name is the same. Yep. Just for kicks, let's change this name to something more readable. Yep, we're publishing artifacts. We don't have any variables. We have a trigger that's enabling it, and we have dev. Good. And now we have to change the release. So let's edit this release. Let's change the source alias here. Basta dev build. Basta dev build. Yep, I know, but it was broken before. Save. And let me double check. Okay, continuous deployment is enabled. We do not need branch filters because we are not separating out the project. Predeployment conditions, we don't need any at this moment because it just needs to release after it has grabbed the build artifact. And the task that it needs to do is just deploy to the Azure App Service, which we have here. It's connected to my correct manager subscription. It's connected to the correct app service name that I have. I don't have any slots at the moment, but you can use that if you wanted to do multi-stage canary deployments or blue-green deployments. So everything looks good. So let's see. Cross my fingers that this works. Yeah. Fix typos on German translation. Git push. Okay, so now, good, it's running. Okay. So, while we wait for this, where's the best bratwurst I can get here in Frankfurt? Nobody's from here, really? Where's the best Brötchen I can get here from here? Schnitzel? Anything? Nothing? Nix? Still have a couple steps to go. You have some time. So, yeah? Oh, yes, I forgot about Jenna. Do you know the name? The name of the dinner place?
Metropolitan Kebab or something?
Metropolitan Kebab?
I was there 2 years ago. So
Oh, okay. Within the past year, maybe.
I saw it driving by, but I don't remember the name exactly.
Okay.
There's a big green sign.
That's something that I have to eat here. I know that there's different kinds of bratwurst here that I'm supposed to try. I know there's a, what is it? Kranz. It's like a cake, Frankfurter Kranz. Kranz. Das ist korrekt? I should probably study some sort of stand-up to do while I wait for this. I promise you, my talk tomorrow is going to be not as a lull-y, and we're not going to be waiting as long. Let's see. So finalize job. Okay. So post job, it's finalizing, report it. Let's go. Pipelines. Cool. It has built. So releases? Of course not. What did we do wrong? Let's see. Basta dev build. Did I name it incorrectly? Nope. Basta dev build. Let's see. We will get through this together because there's a lot more I have to show you. Let me see. Yes, yes. Publish artifact, name is drop. That's correct, that's correct. Okay. It's latest, and source alias. Yep. After release, job and task. It's a web app on Windows, nothing fancy. This is the right subscription. It's the right app service name. Maybe it just, the demo gods are not nice to me today. Let's see. Well, we can continue. So what it would look like is this. That's all you're missing out on. And let's see. So what I wanted to show you, understanding that this would go once I figure out what the bug is. What is really nice about this is that in a normal business case, so once we move it into dev, that's great. You can test it out, you can pull it yourself. Maybe you have another stage where QA needs to test it, and that's exactly what we had. So what we could do is add another stage here. And this time we'll call this QA. And in order to ease our manager's concerns, something that's already built in here is something called post-deployment approvals. So we would use these in two various ways. So for example, for dev, we didn't really need anything here, actually. Where we did want it was for QA afterwards. So we did do both. So I'll show you both. So once we have verified, just very superficially in our dev's environment that it was working, we would have to get somebody's approval here. So for example, if I search for myself, I could add myself here. You could add a timeout of how long this approval would exist. Usually we would do around 4 hours because we didn't like things sitting around. We wanted to make sure the whole point of this was to get speedier and to get faster. And after this, one very important part of making sure our branches were pristine and that our process was good and secure was that the user requesting a release or deployment shouldn't be the one approving it. This is very important to us because this was a problem for us in our company before. The developer who was working, the senior engineer, he was the only one working on this platform for a very long time. And so he never had to deal with working with a team. He never had to deal with pull requests or code reviews. He just merged straight onto master and then pasted that thing over. So once we started coming in and more team members came in, it became imperative for us to actually start implementing these kinds of policies. We needed to review each other's code. It didn't matter that you're the senior engineer. You could be the 10x engineer. I don't care. Everybody has to go through the same process because it's those kinds of loopholes that if you don't follow and you just let anybody go through, that's where the bugs come in. That's where knowledge transfer could happen but doesn't. So then the junior developers don't get that knowledge transfer because you're just pushing things straight through. That's how things break, because nobody gets to see what it is you're actually going through. So even though this is a very, very small, seemingly small configuration of a checkbox that you could not even glance at later on, something that's very important that I highly advise that you do. That way everybody that requests this build, usually by the build being triggered, is not the same one that can approve it. To piggyback on that, I want to actually talk about, I'm going to leave because it's not working. So another thing that we wanted to do here is the branch policies. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and this is something that we have spent a lot of time pretty much arguing over, wasting a lot of additional time getting on the same page with our team. But in the end, this is something that has saved our process and has made it a lot more robust. So the first thing that we would do is require a minimum number of reviewers. And what we would do is always have at least 2. So just like I alluded to earlier, it was only that one guy, he was the only one working on it, he pushed everything through, that's cool. Once our team started to grow, we wanted that to stop. And you saw that the moment we started implementing this policy and nobody could just willy-nilly push to dev, you saw that the number of bugs, the really dumb ones that would pass through, really went down. It decreased significantly, whether it was a typo or it was a forgotten dependency, something like that. All of these things went down because we were not bypassing pretty much the critical review of somebody else. And that's something that we should all really do as a development team. So you'll see here that it actually has an option here. I don't know why in the world they would offer it here, unless you're working by yourself, I guess, but then that's pretty much overkill if you're fulfilling all of this for yourself. We do not allow completion if some reviewers vote to wait or reject, and we also do reset code reviewer votes when there are new changes. This is also very important. There were times where this same senior engineer, I'll not name him because these videos are going to go on YouTube. You know who you are. So what would happen is this person would go through, they would get the approvals, right? So yes, they got the 2 minimum reviewers, they have the approve, and then they would just sneak in a quick little fix, push that in. It would obviously get rolled into the pull request, and because those people have already approved it, it went through. And that's a really, really bad loophole that we did not want. So this particular check right here is actually very, very smart. Anytime a new change has happened, those votes are reset. Those people need to look at that change again. You have changed something that was not previously there when they have given that approval. So this is always on for us, and it has remained on and has helped. Another thing that's very, very helpful and really makes our workflow a lot nicer and a lot less headache down the road is if you're using Azure Boards like we were using this for our agile planning, and this is where we kept our tasks, this is where we had our boards, and we made it a policy for our team that every pull request had to be linked to a work item. This kills so many birds with one stone. Number one, because our project manager wanted to be able to trace everything. All the work that you're doing, if there's nothing actionable that they can report up to management that says, what does this work relate to? Well, it relates to task work item number 4271 for this feature, or this for this epic. If you can start incrementing that and showing the progress that you're doing, and by showing the linked work item of what you are producing, this is very helpful. This won't let you go and merge into the dev branch or any other branch that you select this for, because it will check for it. You can make it optional, but for us, because again, we were a full Microsoft shop and we were using boards, it just made sense for us to pretty much use it. And it kept us accountable to say, oh yeah, we need to make sure this is in there. And it also helped us when we would work on one-off things or things that came up to remember to actually add a work item into our boards to be able to track that. How many times have you gotten a random bug or a production fire that was not planned? You needed to add a task on there, and you usually don't remember to add that task, right? It's a production fire. Just get on it, start working on it, debugging it, see what's wrong, get it fixed, go. And so when those types of things happen, and they happened a lot because our process was not automated yet, we lost a lot of time and tracking of where our hours were going to. But this configuration alone helped us stay accountable to make sure those items are linked. This is another one. This varies with team. For my team, it was very helpful, especially once the senior engineer was gone. So check for comment resolution. So as you're going through the pull request, and I actually have a whole nother talk about this, but when you have constructive comments and you have things that you're suggesting to your coworker about what to do, we want to make sure that they actually read it. You know, how many times have you had a pull request where there are more than 10 files? It's going to take you at least 10 minutes to thoroughly and diligently go through to see what's happening. And within 2 seconds, they're like, oh, LGTM, approve. They didn't look at that. It did not take them 2 seconds to look at the entire feature. So what this helps is if you do have comments or if you do have nitpicks, right? If it's indentation, which again, that should not be something that you should be commenting on. You should have linters fix that for you. You want to make sure that the person reviewing your code has actually seen it. And likewise, when you finish working on your code and then you just push it off, I mean, when I do that, I kind of just forget about it for a little bit, right? I'm done. I've finished this task finally. It's up for a pull. It's in a pull request to be reviewed, and I just have to wait for it to be merged. Kind of forget about it for a while. With this in hand, if somebody does have a question, or there is a typo, or there is something wrong, that makes sure that I'm accountable to say, yes, I saw this. Yes, I will fix it. And yes, I will do something about it. So ensuring that I have actually seen that is invaluable, because when this was not implemented, sometimes we would catch ourselves and say, hey, did you see that this was here? Or they would leave a comment, but without this being enforced, we'd forget about it and continue on and push it through. They would write a comment, something that's very valuable, and it wouldn't go, and we would forget about it and would go through. So limit merge types. This, again, is based on your workflow. What worked for our team is that merging into dev, we essentially would do squash merge. And what this does is when they go to open a pull request, these are the only options that are available to them. There's no way for them to mess it up. I have done that once. All these options were available before, and I think I accidentally clicked rebase and fast forward, and that was not a fun time. That was about 2 weeks of trying to pull back where actually it was going through. So in order to stop that, but also for other developers, new developers, people who are not familiar with Git, even your own team who is just moving on to this is very helpful to just prevent those kinds of errors. But also, this helps you enforce the kind of workflow that your team has decided on. So like I said, merging into dev, the way most of our devs work, the way I work, is when we open a feature branch, we'll make multiple commits, a few, and whenever we want to merge this into dev, we want this to be clean. We don't want that entire history, especially if it's something that we've been working on for a while. We don't want all of that. We want it to be pristine, especially because when we ultimately merge dev into prod, we don't want that history. So for feature branches into dev, anything going into dev, we have limited it to squash merge. And again, you can change this per branch. So another thing that is very helpful to add is the build policy. So very similar to GitHub, this essentially does a pre-build. This says after all of those things are done, this does like a test run. This merges it into dev as a dry run and catches any mistakes before it happens. So again, just another approval, another check for you to ensure that everything that's being merged into dev is pristine. And again, this has helped us, just like, I mean, I'm sure every one of you that has used GitHub, when you see something has failed, obviously you take the opportunity to fix it. Again, here, these are more chances to fix everything in the beginning, rather than have it go all the way through, have it be in prod, and then working backwards. That's always the thing we want to avoid. We always want to make sure that when we go to prod and release to prod, it is as pristine as possible. We know it's going to work, and we know that it's going to work every single time. Yeah?
Do you need to configure the build pipeline especially? Because the current configuration does have to focus on develop. Is there a need to configure feature branches as well separately?
No, I both select the right branch.
Yes, what you said.
It will merge first and then.
Okay.
We'll merge dev and this and then.
But then it's not a pre-build. It's
Don't push it to dev. It will merge but not push it.
So yes, it essentially does a dry run, but it will not go and fully do it, not until all checks have passed. It's like another, if you have automated tests set up and you need to make sure the threshold is 90% or above, something like that, it's another check that will have to pass before it can fully go through. All right, and the last thing I wanted to show you here is to add automatic reviewers. So again, what we did here to help ease a lot of what we did, this is my other thing. So what we did here is created groups. And the thing that is most important I want to show you, so automatically add reviewers, you know what that does. This helps cut down bias, because if you add all the people on your team, or the most important people that should be looking at this code review, you require all of them to have that approval. This cuts down on, hey, if you approve my pull request, I'll approve yours. That happens a lot with like pair programming or buddies on teams, and that's not what we want. We want the code review to be a fair process. We want it to be a pragmatic process, and we want to make sure it does what it's supposed to, which is catch any design flaws and make sure all code goes through the diligent review process that it should go through. But the thing that I did want to show you is for pull requests affecting these folders. How many here are familiar with GitHub code owners file? Cool. So the code owners file in GitHub is similar to the .gitignore file in the sense that the patterns that you place in that file allow you to ignore certain files, right? They don't get added to source control. So what the code owners file in GitHub does, let's say you do star.js, and then you add the person's name. What that does is it automatically adds that person to a code review if any JS files are changed. So in a similar fashion, you can do that here in Azure repos. So let's say that was that. Oh no, this is not that. Let me see.
Just autocorrect.
Where is it? Nope. Allow requesters to approve their own change. No. To include the specify. Oh, yes. So this is for that person. So I was looking for another one. So for example, this person, Kamusta, that's just a service account. Let's actually use mine. So it makes more sense. So let's say you have components, or you have front end, or somebody who is a JS expert, or you have a part in your project that is a legacy code base. You can drill down to those particular files, or that folder, or that component, and using this pattern, you can say, hey, if any pull requests have changes that are JS files, auto add Adrienne Tacke immediately. And it will always do that for every pull request. And this was very helpful, because on most teams you have some people who are, have strengths in other areas, or have worked with other parts of the project way more than you have. So it would be better for them to be viewing it, or at least be part of the pull request, because they'll have a better understanding of what to look for in that code review. So that's pretty much it. I promise you I will figure out what that was. I'm going to tweet out the fix later on. But the only other thing I want to show you, oh, see, it did go. What the heck? You see that? So it did work. Okay, let's see if it... Ah! Woo! That makes me so... It just took a while. So see, it was automated, and I swear I did not manually trigger that. You saw everything I was doing the entire time. So yeah, so I promise you it's usually not this tricky. I probably just forgot some things, but this is essentially the process that we went through to get our deployments away from copy and paste to fully automated. And I will quickly go back and wrap this up. So it shouldn't be complicated. Well, this doesn't make sense anymore because that was a very rough demo. But it really should be that easy. And the point that I want to make is that we shouldn't be having to finagle around with this. You saw how difficult that was. If that was the process every single time, if I had to do these steps manually every single time in order to deploy, you saw how error prone that was. You saw how many little things that I missed. And that was what we were running into with our manual deployments. So by figuring this out the first time, making sure it works and getting it correctly the first time, you can ensure that every other time that you create bug fixes, that you create new features, that it's going to build correctly for you, and it's going to do so reliably every single time. So what did our thing move to now? Well, we would code, we would open a PR, as we did, we would auto-add reviewers, as I've shown you, and add the appropriate people according to the filters that you can add. We would run the pre-build. This helped catch a lot of fixes, a lot of things that we were going through in production, a lot of stupid issues that should have been caught beforehand. This is another thing, and this is standard on GitHub, so we said we might as well put it on here. It's just another check. We do the code review because at this point, we are assuming that we have done everything in our power to make sure that the code we're about to merge is as good as possible. Then we trigger the dev build. We're not doing that anymore. We deploy to dev. We do another pull request from dev to master. Maybe trigger the QA build, have the QA environment get tested, deploy to QA. We would get QA approval, which is that pre-deployment approval I showed. You can also do post-deployment approvals. And that's what we did with our final approvals. So in the release pipeline that I showed you, we would have QA approve that it was working in our QA environment, and then that would trigger a release to prod. But before it actually released, it would be pending a final approval from our project manager. They were the final say, they are the last call, and they were the final thing that was needed for compliance, that was needed for logging, that was needed for balance and checks between our team. And so now we deployed to prod, and that's now how I feel about everything right now. So yes, so that's all I have for you. Vielen Dank.